Good evening. I'm Alex, and welcome to America Headlines. Tonight, we begin with a major development from the highest court in the United States. The Supreme Court has ruled in favor of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement efforts in Southern California, overturning earlier lower court decisions and sparking a nationwide debate about constitutional protections, immigration policy, and law enforcement authority. This decision has quickly become one of the most talked about rulings of the year, both because of its direct impact on communities in Southern California and because of the precedent it sets for immigration enforcement across the country. The case that reached the Supreme Court stemmed from a series of immigration enforcement operations conducted by federal agents in several counties across Southern California. These operations were carried out by officers tasked with verifying the immigration status of individuals in public areas such as transportation hubs, farming sites, and community gathering points. Lower courts, including a federal district judge, had previously raised serious concerns about these practices. Judges noted that, according to complaints, many of the stops appeared to be based largely on an individual's appearance, language, or perceived ethnic background. The courts argued that these actions risked violating the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. One district court ruling specifically ordered that enforcement officers could not rely primarily on ethnicity, language, or location to justify stopping individuals. That ruling effectively restricted large-scale patrols in certain parts of Los Angeles and neighboring counties. However, the administration appealed, arguing that the lower courts had gone too far in limiting the federal government's ability to enforce existing immigration laws. They claimed the operations were lawful and essential for maintaining security and accountability in the immigration system. On Monday, the Supreme Court sided with the Trump administration in a significant 5-4 decision. Writing for the majority, Justice Brett Kavanaugh emphasized that while ethnicity alone cannot justify reasonable suspicion, a combination of factors can. He noted that courts must look at the totality of circumstances when determining whether a stop is justified. In other words, if officers observe multiple signs, such as unusual travel patterns, inconsistent identification documents, or other behavioral indicators, then a brief stop may be considered legally permissible, even if ethnicity or language is part of the overall context. Justice Kavanaugh further stressed that these were not extended detentions, but rather brief encounters intended solely to verify immigration status. He wrote that such stops fall within the legal framework of established immigration enforcement powers and do not, on their own, violate constitutional rights. This ruling effectively overturns the injunctions imposed by lower courts, clearing the way for the continuation of federal immigration patrols in Southern California. The decision was not unanimous, and the dissent was strong. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson, issued a sharp rebuke. Justice Sotomayor warned that the ruling risks opening the door to discriminatory enforcement practices. She wrote, "We should not live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, or works a low-wage job." She argued that the Constitution demands stronger protections against what she described as potential profiling. According to Sotomayor, the majority failed to adequately safeguard the rights of U.S. citizens and lawful residents who may be mistakenly targeted under these patrols. The dissent also pointed to recent remarks made by administration officials. For example, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem publicly criticized a district judge's earlier ruling in unusually blunt terms, calling it misguided and vowing that enforcement operations would continue regardless of legal obstacles. Sotomayor suggested that such comments underscored the aggressive nature of the administration's approach to immigration enforcement. While the immediate effect of the ruling applies to 7 counties in Southern California, its implications extend far beyond those boundaries. Legal experts say the decision signals broader approval for similar enforcement strategies nationwide. This is especially important because the Trump administration has filed nearly 24 emergency appeals to the Supreme Court since January, many of them related to immigration. The court's willingness to grant emergency relief in this case could embolden the administration to pursue similar measures elsewhere in the United States. Immigration enforcement has long been one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. Supporters of stronger enforcement argue that such patrols are necessary to uphold federal law, deter unlawful entry, and ensure public safety. They point out that immigration officers are tasked with carrying out responsibilities assigned to them by Congress, and that limiting their authority weakens the overall enforcement system. Critics, however, argue that these patrols disproportionately affect Latino communities and place many U.S. citizens at risk of being questioned simply because of their appearance or language. Civil liberties organizations have warned that this could erode trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement, making it harder to address crimes and ensure cooperation at the local level. Reactions to the ruling were swift and divided. Supporters of the ruling, including several Republican lawmakers, praised the decision as a victory for the rule of law. They argued that the Supreme Court had restored necessary enforcement powers to federal officers and reinforced the principle that immigration laws must be applied consistently. Opponents, including immigrant rights groups and Democratic leaders, denounced the ruling as a setback for civil liberties. They warned that it could lead to widespread fear and anxiety in Latino neighborhoods, discouraging people from going about daily activities like shopping, commuting, or even sending their children to school. Legal scholars noted that the ruling leaves many questions unanswered. For instance, how courts should evaluate the totality of circumstances remains somewhat vague, leaving room for inconsistent application in the future. This ruling adds to a long history of Supreme Court cases dealing with the balance between immigration enforcement and constitutional rights. For example, in the 1970s, the court ruled in United States v. Brignoni-Ponce that ethnicity alone could not justify a stop near the border. However, the court also acknowledged that immigration enforcement officers have broader authority near international boundaries than in the interior of the country. Monday's decision builds on that precedent, but broadens the interpretation of what factors can be considered reasonable suspicion, even away from the immediate border. Critics argue that this effectively lowers the threshold for justifying a stop, while supporters say it provides necessary flexibility for law enforcement. Legal experts believe the ruling may invite additional challenges in the coming months. Civil rights groups have already announced plans to monitor enforcement closely and to file new lawsuits if evidence emerges of widespread profiling or abuse. At the same time, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are expected to use this decision to advance their political arguments. Supporters of stricter enforcement will likely cite it as proof that the courts back their approach, while opponents will use it to push for legislative reforms aimed at protecting vulnerable communities. The Biden administration, if it returns to power, would also face the question of whether to continue, modify, or roll back these enforcement practices. That means this case is unlikely to be the final word on the issue. For residents of Southern California, especially in counties with large immigrant populations, the decision will be felt immediately. Advocacy groups report that even before the ruling, many individuals were already hesitant to travel freely, fearing encounters with enforcement officers. Now, with the Supreme Court's backing, those fears may intensify. Community leaders are urging calm, while also providing resources such as legal hotlines and informational sessions to help residents understand their rights. Local officials, too, are grappling with how to respond. Some city leaders have expressed frustration, saying the ruling undermines efforts to build trust between local police and immigrant communities. Others have pledged to support federal enforcement and emphasize cooperation. The Supreme Court's decision represents a major turning point in the ongoing national debate over immigration enforcement. By siding with the Trump administration, the court has effectively expanded the discretion of federal officers while raising concerns about potential civil rights violations. The ruling has left the nation deeply divided. Supporters view it as a necessary step to uphold the rule of law, while critics see it as a dangerous precedent that threatens constitutional freedoms. What is clear is that the conversation is far from over. Immigration remains one of the most complex and contentious issues in America, and this case has only added fuel to an already heated debate. We will continue to follow developments closely, tracking both the immediate effects in Southern California and the broader implications across the nation. For now, this ruling stands as one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions of the year, with ripple effects that will be felt for years to come. That concludes tonight's edition of America Headlines. I'm Alex, thank you for joining us, and we'll continue to bring you updates as this story unfolds.